So this is 160 here, and we're going to finish chapter 3 today down here. There we are. Next week there's a tech talk, and then we'll carry on with chapter 4. But the first thing I want to do, let me bring in my slides, and then I'll show you these documents. There was a very interesting Federal Trade Commission case where the papers just came out this week. And I used to work for the Federal Trade Commission as a contractor, and this caught my attention, and it's very interesting. Cafe Press was an internet company. I don't know if they're still in business, but they would make custom t-shirts and mugs and stuff, and they egregiously failed to protect their data. They got hacked. They did not handle the hack correctly, and so the Federal Trade Commission gave them a complaint. And here's the complaint. I'll put the URL in the chat. The complaint is very specific and very interesting to read. If you go down here, it tells you exactly what they did and why it was wrong. And so they collected information from people, email addresses, security questions, passwords, credit cards, and so on. And they claim that they were protecting your network, their data, but they were not protecting your data. So their data security practices were not good enough. They failed to implement reasonable measures. They did not hash the passwords properly. They had SQL injection vulnerabilities. They had a bunch of other vulnerabilities on their network. They failed to log what was going on their network. Didn't comply with their own policies. They did not do vulnerability tests and penetration tests like they should have, and many other things. So this is a very interesting thing to read, full of all the best practices that we're talking about, and how Cafe Press egregiously failed to do it. Doesn't this kind of breach and lack of disclosure happen all the time? Well, it does, but what's interesting is now we're reaching the point where you will be punished for it. I mean, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, the standards weren't clear, but now the kind of information you get in this textbook are now pretty well-known standard practices, and you can actually punish, and they got punished by the Federal Trade Commission, and they made an agreement here. So this is another way to look at it. This is the agreement, the settlement agreement of the lawsuit, where they promised to do a whole bunch of things to fix it, and it's pretty much, again, everything from your textbook. In order to, now they are required to do a whole bunch of good things. They are required to document their information security program, designate somebody to be in charge of it, implement safeguards for internal and external risks, have technical measures, encrypt things, have policies and procedures, improve their authentication measures, and all the stuff basically you'll see in all this in the textbook. They just basically have a list of all these best practices they must do, and a nice long list of these. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting, and I thought reading through that would be good for you people, learning about policies and procedures and recommended security practices. So I made an extra credit quiz. If you want to get some points for studying that, there's a quiz in Canvas. You can take if you read that document, the answers are in the document. Treat it like a chapter in the book if you like. It's another way to go over the same material. And it shows, this security is beginning to become kind of standardized and expected. Anyway, so we're down to the last part of operational risk management here. And so this is talking about your financial losses and survival. So an operational risk is something that could cause a loss at your company that would cause it to not operate correctly and perhaps go out of business. So your controls didn't work, some kind of events happened, something happened that messed with your business systems, like Cafe Press, of course. They got hacked, the hack became public, they were revealed to have handled it badly, and that's the kind of thing that harms your business. So when you talk about recovering from a security incident, there are various kinds of objectives. Most of them are time intervals, how long it takes to recover, and there's also third-party risk, especially now that so many people have moved to the cloud. Some of your business functions are being handled on other people's servers, and you may not be able to control how long it takes to get them back. So your risk register is your key record. It keeps track of the risks you found and how you dealt with them, and how you quantified the risks and decided which ones to focus on. So here's the various types of objectives: recovery time and point and capacity, service delivery, maximum tolerable downtime and outage, and service level agreements. These are all measurements of the quality of your handling of security incidents. So the recovery time objective is how long it takes you to resume service after something bad happens, some kind of disaster. So this is your goal of how quickly you'll bring something back. So for example, if your point of sale terminals goes down, you probably want them to come back really fast if it's business hours, but if you're outside business hours, it's probably okay for it to take longer. So the recovery time objective depends on what part of the business it affects and how important that is to you right now. So data classification and asset classification also helps. The processes with short recovery time objectives are the things that are operationally critical, the things which bring your business to a halt or cause you to lose a lot of money for all the time they're down. For example, if the City College website went down before the pandemic, that really wouldn't matter very much because our classes were face-to-face and we didn't need to use the website every day. But if the website goes down at Google, that's the whole business. Their entire business has stopped. It's a disaster. So I'm sure they want to bring it back really fast, like within 5 minutes, whereas City College generally could probably leave it down for a day or two and it really wouldn't materially affect the business. So in order to determine the recovery time objective, you can interview the personnel and executives to ask them, loading and playing. It won't play via my app in the browser. Yeah, I don't know what's happening to you. I didn't even know there was an app for Twitch. I don't know what's happening to you, NMM. That's kind of a problem. I wonder, I'm just doing a lecture. Maybe I can send it over Zoom too. I'll try opening the Zoom and see if that works for you, NMM, because it's no fun if you can't see the lecture. And Zoom slows down my machine a bit, but I don't think it matters when I'm not using virtual machines or anything. So let me see if I can make that work. All right. Let me get the link, which is here. You can try the Zoom if you like. Oh, didn't get the start of it. And I'll try sharing this thing in the Zoom and see if that's going to work. I should be able to share this thing. All right. So that might be good. You can try Zoom if Twitch is not working. All right. Anyway, hopefully you get something working there. So you might interrogate your management. If anybody would like to learn more, Women of the NCL. Oh, that's good. Yeah, put up a link for that. Anyway, so you can interview your executives and say, how long could you live without this server, without this process? And you could, your recovery time objectives should come from a business impact analysis, which is when you decide how much is this particular process important to our business? How long can we put up with it being down? And that's part of business continuity planning, which is how you plan to survive a disaster. So the recovery point objective is different than the recovery time objective. Recovery time objective is how long it takes to perform recovery. The recovery point objective is how much you actually recover. If you back up every week, then in a disaster, you might lose a whole week worth of work if it happens at the wrong time. So this is the how much you're able to recover your work. A shorter recovery point objective has a higher cost. That means you must back up more often. Recovery capacity objective measures how much a business process, how much of the capacity is restored in your recovery after disaster. For example, if you can't use the computers and you have to do everything by writing things down on paper, then maybe that will lower your efficiency to 80% of normal, and that's your recovery capacity. You're only able to restore 80% of the normal capacity. Then there's a service delivery objective, which is a similar thing. How much do you deliver service? Do your customers get slower service, or are missing some of the features or something? This again, how much service do you in fact have during the recovery period after a disaster before you've restored the original while using some kind of alternate system? Then there's the maximum tolerable downtime. This is how long you can tolerate something being down. So you might start with that and then decide these other things. This is also the acceptable interruption window. All right. And this is the only CISM I know. I don't know if this is definitely part of the CISM. I don't think it's a new one. I think it's been the same for a while. So the maximum tolerable downtime is different for business functions, like maybe you can put up without the website for 7 days, but a whole month for payroll. You typically only pay people every week, 2 weeks or a month anyway, so that being down for a while would not be as fatal. All right, and then there's the maximum tolerable outage. How long can you continue to operate with these recovery modes, with these alternate systems? That's another issue. And service level agreements are when you deal with another company, you have a written contract saying they promise to deliver a certain amount of service, and there is some kind of consequences if they don't. They have to help you recover, replace the broken equipment, pay a fine or something, an agreement that specifies how much service they're going to give you and under what circumstances that service will no longer be considered acceptable. All right. So risk management and business continuity planning are both trying to preserve your business, rely on business impact analysis and threats, and plan your response to it. And as I was mentioning, especially in the issue of cloud services, you hit third-party risk management. So you're trying to determine what is the risk coming from external organizations, primarily because you have outsourced to the cloud or elsewhere. And so it doesn't be complicated. You have to ask those other organizations how they treat things, and then you might wonder if they are telling you the truth. They might be lying to you like Cafe Press did, claiming that they're encrypting and protecting things when they really aren't. So you have to decide what's your operational responsibility. Now, if it's your own equipment on your own premise, then the organization is responsible for everything, the operating system, the data, the networking, and so on. If it's infrastructure as a service, then they're just renting you a piece of hardware, and so everything you put on there is your responsibility, and the provider is only responsible for keeping the hardware up. If it's a platform or software as a service, then more and more of the responsibility is on the provider. And here's more things: security responsibility for human resources, and asset management, and network intrusion detection, and so on. These are different depending on the level of cloud service that you're using. So third-party risk management has a life cycle. You assess the risk, you get a legal agreement, and then you have some issue of evidence of how much evidence have they given you that proves that they're actually doing what they should be, and you may assess them, and then you may have risk mitigation. So your initial assessment decides how to choose which partner to go to. This was a big issue with the JEDI contract. The U.S. military was going to have a $10 billion contract moving a bunch of military services to one cloud provider, and originally that bid went to Amazon because Microsoft was not considered to be compliant with federal standards. Microsoft sued and managed to get it moved to Microsoft, and then Bezos sued, and I think they finally canceled the whole thing. But anyway, there was a big issue here of deciding who could actually meet their requirements. So you send out a request for information or a request for proposal. People send you a bid explaining what they offer and how much it will cost, and then you choose which one is best. So you get a legal agreement promising what service they provide, at what service level, and the pricing. And then you have a security and privacy setting, which specifies what they do, what kind of controls they have, what kind of management program. If they meet one of these certifications, one of these compliance standards. That's an easy way to make sure they're up to your required level. Instant response, security incident notification, how long it's going to be before they tell you if there is a security incident and exactly what's required. This is a big problem. As I mentioned, Cafe Press got hacked and tried to conceal it, and Uber did this too. Uber got a ransomware incident, so they paid the ransom to get the data back, and then they tried to say it was not an incident. They just tried calling it a bug bounty and not admitting they'd had a ransomware incident, and eventually got in big trouble for that. You may have the right to audit your cloud provider, which is nice. You may be able at least to send them questionnaires and other things to see if they're actually doing what they say they're doing. There is a big level of risk among third parties, and it'll change as you change the properties of your outsourcing. So you might send them questionnaires to assess what they're doing. You might also request evidence, and then they'll send you specific documents to support what they're claiming. So here's some issue. There's a PCI DSS assessment. Small merchants that take credit card numbers are just supposed to perform a assessment questionnaire to decide if they're compliant. People that take more credit card numbers actually have to be audited by a qualified third party. So here's artifacts you might get: a copy of the policy, checklist, details on employee background checks, non-disclosure agreements, the phone management process, their insurance policies, instant response plan. These are all things they might send you to prove that in fact they are doing the security things that they should be doing. So you can assess them at the onset of business and periodically thereafter, checking to see if they are in fact doing what you think they should be doing. So you can check various kinds of risk. Right now, of course, the big issue is geopolitical risk. Everybody is pulling out of Russia, and everybody's trying to make sure that they're not using Russian software, and they're not using Russian supply chain, and so on. A lot of risks involved in the geopolitical chaos we're living through. You can subscribe to services which will give you information about the risk of companies in various ways and a reputational barometer, so you can just stay informed of the news and the scandals and the threats and such out there. So hopefully you will be informed if the people you're doing business with are getting in trouble earlier. And so you might have risk mitigation. If you determine that your cloud provider is not doing a good enough job, then you have to decide what to do. You can try to convince them to change their processes, or you can move to another provider, or maybe you can convince them to add some extra process just for your account to lower the risk. There are various possible responses if you do not like what they're doing. So let's take a look at a Cahoot. All right. All right, this is 3D1. There it is. I think I'm going to close Zoom. Nobody's using it, and I think it's slowing things down. All right. Well, it'll be easy to win if there's only 3 players. All right, we will carry on. It's good for review for people to watch the video anyway. All right, a contract with a vendor. Okay, that's the service level agreement. All right, a percentage of normal business efficiency. That's your recovery capacity objective. A common type of audit. SOC compliance, very popular. All right. And the weakest form of due diligence. Yeah, you just ask them to say what they're doing and you don't verify it in any way. That's a weak form of diligence. All right. I don't know who that is. They'll have to tell me who they are if they want points. But that I can tell who it is. All right. All right. So, all right. So you got the risk register. This is your list of the risks you found, the origin of them, the impact, how likely they are to occur, and then what treatment you did to deal with the risk. This is your central business record that shows that you are managing risk. And here's what it might look like. You have a number, status, dates and the source, incident number and description, and then the threat actor, the vulnerability, third-party organizations, the impact, and then assets and responsible people inside your company, and then controls, and the untreated probability of occurrence, and then the untreated impact and risk score, and then your risk treatment, and you consider those things again after the treatment, and then you have the cost of the treatment and the level of effort required to perform the treatment, your treatment, and then the people responsible to implement the treatment, and then, how much it actually did cost, and so on. This is how you keep a record of what you did, how much it cost, and then you can eventually decide whether that's enough, whether you want to change it, whether you want to repeat that sort of treatment for other risks. So you get a lot of sources for the information, your risk and vulnerability assessments, your audits, the threat intelligence and incidents, the news, industry developments, new laws and regulations, consultants you might have, all these things may provide information that goes in the risk register. Strategic risks are what goes in the risk register. These are long-term big things which might affect the survival of the company. Not every little thing, but the big things. Like a systemic problem with server patching. We're not checking to see that the servers are patched. We don't have some kind of regular program to make that happen. That's a big problem. Tactical risks, problems with individual assets, don't belong in the risk register. That's just routine stuff. So your risk analysis is required in here. So I thought this is kind of funny because I'm doing a secure coding class for corporation now for exactly this. Their software development team is producing too much defective code, so they decided to treat that risk by hiring me and my gang to come in and teach them to write more secure code. So that's what they're doing. So that's the secure development training. You might have an incentive reward, better code scanning tools that they run it through, something to pick up the bugs and clean them up. Those are possible risk treatments. Pen tests, adding more security devices on the network, all these are things that would lower the risk of your buggy code. After your risk treatment, the risk does not go down to zero, so you have some residual risk, and you might have to have another round of treatment to lower it further if the residual risk is still not acceptable. All right, and this integrates into other processes. Your software development, change management, physical security, human resources. This is the big message of all modern security certifications like CISSP and CISM. Everybody has learned that you need to be considering security in every business process. It's not something you can just bolt on afterwards efficiently. So when you're writing software, you should be considering the security while you're first developing and writing your software. It's much cheaper to deal with security problems in the design phase rather than trying to add patches later after you deploy software. Change management. If you don't have a change management program, then you don't control your security. People will just make changes on the network and foul things up. That's a very immature security posture. Once you get past that point, you will have a process for making changes, like changing the operating system of a server, adding another location, things like that. So you have to put in a proposal, and then you have a change management board that determines whether this is okay or not, and you have a backout procedure, how you're going to return to the previous state if the change is a failure and doesn't work, and then you'll have a window of time set to perform the change. Your change review board will discuss these and include the security consequences as well as other considerations and decide whether the change is worth doing or not. Configuration management is just changing the configuration of devices like firewalls and servers and such, and you use a database to keep track of these configurations. You want to protect your configuration data because it often indicates ways people could attack you, and you want to keep track of your configurations. You got incident management and problem management. So you got to consider people need to understand if the problem they're investigating has security consequences like a malfunctioning firewall that's no longer protecting your network. If they're doing things to restore service, that might change things. If your root cause analysis, where you try to figure out what happened and how this may involve changing permissions on files and such, and your corrective action may also have security impacts. Physical security, you have to consider physical intrusions by people on your network and make sure that the high availability systems are protected by locked doors and fences and guards, things like that. So you can include your physical security assets into your general technology and security architecture. You're keeping track of the physical risks. All right. Make sure you're also protecting the environment, with mainly temperature and humidity, but also power. All right. Then you've got enterprise risk management. It has its own risk register. And human resources. Humans are usually the big problem, and this is what that Rachel Toback video is about. You might have great firewalls and servers, but your humans don't have a good procedure for dealing when somebody calls on the phone, of really making sure that they know who they're talking to and they know that person is authorized to hand out information to. These are the many things about your humans, so background checks, training, development, and so on matter to keep track of your people. And project management, as you perform projects, there will be implications for security. As you roll out projects, like I remember at the college, we rolled out a whole new generation of desktop computers for everybody. It took about a year or two. And of course, that had a lot of consequences, changed everybody's business process, and so on. All right, so you monitor your risks with things like audits and assessments. And typically these audits go to management that just want to see some simple dashboard, like are we in the red or the green, something like that. And you got key risk indicators for management to see. So these are measures of risk, and the main thing you do is see if you're getting better or worse. If you count the number of vulnerabilities, that's generally useless. This is a common issue in open source intelligence. For many years, people have said, Unix is better than Windows because last year Unix had 40 vulnerabilities, but Windows had 100. And everybody screamed saying, that number doesn't mean anything because vulnerabilities are not equal. Some are more important than others. Just counting them is not really worth much. Time, however, that it takes to remediate vulnerabilities is a pretty good measure of how efficient your security team is. That is something management can understand. And they're right. If your team is better, it will fix problems quicker. In general, that's a pretty good measure. So you could measure the security incidents, the attrition rates, how often are people quitting your company, how much money you pay out, how many people have not done their training, how many people have risks in their risk assessments. These are other numbers you might be measuring to determine whether your program is working and what parts of it are working better than others. And then there's training and awareness. You generally make everybody do security awareness training just so they'll know. Don't plug in USB drives, don't click on links from spam emails, and so on. People need to know general security. They need to know your business processes, and they need to know what their responsibilities are, and they should know who to report things to. I heard something this week in the news about Russia, and they said that Putin does not know how inefficient and incompetent his military is. And they said they interviewed there are people who had held high positions in the KGB and now the GRU, whatever it is, and they said the military people there say they would rather perform a coup to try to kill Putin than tell him something he doesn't want to hear. The culture is such that you never tell the boss bad news. And that is what happens here. There are companies where people don't think they dare report a problem because they'll get in trouble. And that's a really bad thing. Now the boss doesn't even know what's going on. The opposite should be true. You should know, everybody should know what to do if there's a problem, who to tell, and they should know that they're not going to get in trouble for reporting a problem, but quite the opposite. They'll be rewarded for helping secure the company. Well, I must say that was certainly not true. A few years ago, I reported dozens of vulnerabilities, and it was painfully obvious that the company I was talking to had no process to deal with the report of a vulnerability. They just had no idea what to do and just ignored it. Now more companies do have a process. So you document this stuff. You should have policy and objectives, roles and responsibilities, how you measure things, and locations to store these things, like the risk register and risk treatment records. And your tolerance, your rules, your procedures, how your communication protocols work, and what your review cycle is. And these are all those documents to prove that you do have a mature plan. It's actually working. You're actually measuring how well it works. And this is the sort of stuff that would do you a lot of good if somebody like the FTC comes knocking, like they did for Cafe Press, and said, all right, are you people idiots or what? Do you actually have documents showing that you're doing intelligent things about risk, or are you just a bunch of clowns? All right, so let's look at the last Cahoot. I kind of thought the Cahoot version might not come back. A couple people dropped out. We might be down to 2. All right, we'll carry on anyway. All right, risks that affect the entire organization. All right, that's strategy. Strategy is long range, tactic is short range. All right, which one of these will lower risk? Treatment will lower risk, unless your treatment is accept, and then it doesn't lower risk, it lowers it only by 0, but all the other treatments lower risk. All right, which one uses a CMDB? Change management. I thought it was configuration management, but it's one of those two. It's not this. Actually, I think a better answer is configuration management. Let me go back and check that. Yep, it should have been configuration management. That's actually the wrong answer. Nobody got it right anyway, but anyway, I'm going to make a note. CMDB in Cahoot. All right, it should have been configuration management. All right. All right, and which business unit might have its own risk register? The ERM, Enterprise Risk Management, they have their own level of thought there. Own level of coverage. All right. So it's... right, there was nobody 3 because there were only 2. Okay. So Fani and Orange Smile. Okay, good. Well, all right. I'll stop that recording.